morning, everyone. First of all, thank you all for coming out this morning for this very, very important topic and this very important issue. 2 days ago, Dan Maffei ran an ad that truly crossed the line. It is the most despicable of ads I've seen in this political season and hope to ever see. Dan Maffei really went to a place he had no business going, and he needs to be held accountable for his words, for his misrepresentation of my record, and for all that I stand for. Dan Maffei accused me of redefining the word rape. That's wrong, it's incorrect, and he knows that better than anyone because he was in Congress and he understands how the system works. Dan Maffei, I know in my baby finger more about domestic violence and rape and what women experience and the trauma that women go through that Dan Maffei could ever imagine. And what he did with this ad is wrong, it's desperate, it's pathetic, and it insults every woman who's ever...
Yes! That's right.
I have spent 16 years of my life as a pro bono legal attorney at Vera House. What a wonderful facility we have in this community for women who need help. On the House floor, we have been for 2 years in a row. I'm so proud of the fact that John Boehner and Nancy Pelosi and all of my colleagues in the House of Representatives wore white ribbons. We carried our Vera House campaign down to Washington and raised awareness about domestic violence. One of the pieces of legislation that I got passed and the President signed into law within the last couple of months had to do with victims of sexual assault in the VA facilities and staff of the VA facilities. I can stand here and I am so proud of my record and how I have stood for women who are victims of domestic violence, women who are victims of rape. Dan Maffei cannot say that. He can only hide behind these ads that are false, that are weak. Dan Maffei, to stand behind women who are victims is the most cowardly act that a human being can do. And he needs to be held accountable for this. Every 6 years, or every 2 years, I apologize, Dan comes into town and wants to tell this community what's good for us and that he can represent us in Congress. Dan Maffei is not from this area. He hasn't lived here. He hasn't worked here. He hasn't invested here. He hasn't volunteered here. He hasn't raised a family here like I have. And I am appalled, even for Dan Maffei, this ad reaches a new depth. I'm appalled that he would even consider doing it, and I apologize to every woman, every victim who's ever been a victim of domestic violence or rape or incest or any other victim of sexual assault. I apologize to you for Dan Maffei's insensitivity and his ambitious attempt to become a member of Congress. He needs to be held accountable. Open up to questions.
So define, what were you voting for in the bill that's in that ad? You know, that he says you're saying this when we're quite here, obviously you're not saying that.
That's right. There were several versions, and Dan understands this. He was a member of Congress. Several versions of a bill that came out that had to do with federal funding for abortion and codifying the Hyde Amendment. There was language in one of the bills that circulated that was consistent with FBI definition of rape from many, many years ago. Once that was called to our attention and we got calls to our office, we said, when we had conversations within our office, you got to pull that language. It's duplicative. Rape is rape is rape. It is violent. It is violent against any victim of rape, and it needs to come out, and that's exactly what we did.
Yes.
Well, and then to the point, you know, if you were to define rape, and, you know, again, exactly what the ad says, you know, where is that line to you of rape, given whether you know the person or what the circumstances are, or date rape or incest or etc.?
Anytime a woman or any victim is compelled and is sexually assaulted against their will, that constitutes rape. You're kidding me, Laura, right? I think that all life is precious from the time it is conceived until the time of natural death. This press conference and Dan Maffei's ad has nothing to do with abortion. It has to do with his deception to women, to victims of rape, and understanding, trying to misconstrue and misrepresent my position about rape. And that's egregious. Yes, sir.
The legislative intent of the revised bill continues to outline categories of sexual assault. Your continued sponsorship of the bill. How do you respond to that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Sorry, you continue to co-sponsor a bill that continues to outline different categories of rape. How do you respond to that?
H.R. 3 that we signed on to had to do with codifying the Hyde Amendment and the prevention of federal funds to be used for abortion. Let's be honest here. The debate is not about abortion. Abortion is legal in this country. You all know that I'm pro-life. The debate is not about abortion. The debate is about whether or not the American taxpayers want to pay for abortion. They want to use their tax dollars to pay for abortions. And statistics show us that the American people, whether or not you are pro-choice, whether or not you are pro-life, the American people don't want to use their taxpayers' dollars to pay for abortions. And that was the issue in this, is whether or not we would use federal funds to pay for abortions.
So it was a confusion with the original legislative definition that led to all this, basically.
That's correct. But Dan knows very well when a bill is circulated, there's many versions of a bill that go around, and what ends up mattering is what comes out of committee and what gets voted on in the House floor. And that bill did not include forcible rape. It needs to be held accountable. And I think for the people who live in upstate New York to understand that this is a desperate person who will say or do anything to be elected to Congress. And I think everyone in this, whether you are pro-life or pro-choice or whatever, wherever you stand on any of these issues, he needs to be held accountable. You cannot say or do anything. This is a man who hides behind victims of sexual assault and yet won't face Ursula and myself in a town hall debate. He doesn't have the courage to face two women and debate the issues. And if he thinks that this is the issue in upstate New York, he's more misguided than I thought. Jobs in the economy are what are on people's minds. We talk about that all the time, how we're going to get this economy back on track, how we're going to create jobs in upstate New York. This is a distraction, this is a distortion, and Dan Maffei needs to be held accountable for this.
Do you think that the tenor of ads like that and just campaigning like that is some reflection on, divisiveness in Washington, inability to get compromises on things like the Farm Bill that just expired, the spending cut cliff that some people say we're about to hit? Does one lead to the other, or is one a byproduct of the other?
I think what we see here is, number one, distortion. Number two, an unwillingness to look at his record. Dan doesn't want to talk about his record. If I had voted for and thought the Affordable Care Act was such a great piece of legislation, and now I was running again 2 years later for Congress, I'd be out there saying what a great piece of legislation that was. Dan doesn't talk about the Affordable Care Act. He doesn't talk what it did to Welsh Allen or what it's going to do to our hospitals, our physicians, or our seniors. Instead, he runs an ad that's completely incorrect and inappropriate.
This is a special interest ad, and is that part of the issue? You have these special interest groups running ads?
Oh, that's the reality since a Supreme Court decision, the independent expenditures, it happens on both sides, and for a candidate and for myself, you lose control. But that was an ad that Dan Maffei ran. That was his ad. That was, and I think what's the most egregious thing is to really use these victims for your political gain. But beyond that, what's egregious is Dan knows the system, he knows how things work, so it really was intentionally misleading, and I think that's even more egregious. Yes, sir.
What happened in Brockport over the weekend, a good example of really what you're trying to say about domestic violence at any level? I mean, with the student that was taken by the man. I mean, is this really kind of a good example of what you're trying to let everyone be aware of?
Of course it is. Of course it is. And the best thing we can do for victims of domestic violence and for this issue is to raise awareness. It's why we're so proud to bring the White Ribbon Campaign down to Washington. It's why, we always talk about Vera House and all of the other facilities we have in this community that help women, and to raise awareness for these things. And to make sure that women who feel threatened understand that there's help available. And we live in a great community and there is help available and there are services available, but they need to know about them or they're not going to access them.
There are some debates scheduled, at least one I know that involves all three candidates. I don't know about the other two that I think are going to happen. Outside of those very few things that, you know, some people will watch and listen to and others won't, how do we get the campaign back on issues?
Well, we challenged, we didn't challenge. We asked Dan and we asked Ursula to participate in 4 town halls in each of the 4 counties. And we didn't pick a venue, we didn't pick a moderator. We thought, let's leave it open so that all the candidates can sit down and we can hash it out and no one feels like there's an unfair advantage. Dan absolutely turned those down. Ursula, we're in the process of working with her and her party to get those scheduled and on the calendar. With the debates, we've had an opportunity to do 4 debates. I think that Dan has possibly agreed to 1, maybe 2 of those debates. But I think the way that we get back on track when we talk about issues is that the people in the district have to hold him accountable for this ad, for his unwillingness to stand up and say what he stands for and talk about where he stands on the issues and quit hiding behind victims of domestic violence or victims of sexual abuse and stand up like a man and say, here's where I stand on the issues, here's Ann Marie Buerkle, here's Ursula, and here's my position. And that's what this community deserves, and that's what we've done. That's why we're so proud of our town halls. I don't think anyone doesn't know where I stand on the issues because we're out there, we're accessible, we're accountable, and that's what a legislator does. That's what a representative does.
Looking at the radar, we're about to get poured on, so if anybody has any other questions, please see me afterwards. We'll do our best to help you, and thank you all for coming out today.
Thank you very much.